Okay, so we will make a start, everybody. Really, really grateful for you joining us for our session today. Really thankful that you have given up sort of the next 55 minutes of your time to join us at our live Pobble online webinar. Thank you those of you that are, as mentioned, watching a recording of this session as well. We will send a link out to everybody in the live session following the conclusion of today's Pobble webinar. So before I dive into my 7 exciting ideas, what I would be really grateful if you could do to get the session started is continuing with your use of the chat. I have popped onto my screen a very quick question. I ask this question at the beginning of every single session that I run, really to get you in the mindset that for the next 55 minutes, we're going to be talking about writing. Some of you will have dashed from a busy school day. Some of you will have just maybe arisen, ready to go to school. So yeah, I want you just for a moment, just to consider your own classroom, to consider your own school, your own setting if you're a school leader. And I want you to think about what is the biggest challenge that you currently face with teaching writing in your school or in your classroom. And if you could share that challenge in the chat for me, I would be really, really grateful. I'm just going to give you a minute to do it. So just pause, think about your classroom, think about your setting, think about your school. What is the biggest challenge you currently face with the teaching of writing? Thank you to all of you that are sharing. I'm going to read some of these out in a moment, but thank you. Do keep them coming. Okay, so just picking out a few trends. Stamina for writing has come through quite a few times. Vocabulary, children with English as an additional language, confidence in writing. Some of the basics perhaps being missed when children are putting pencil to paper. A couple of people have mentioned handwriting, imagination, generating ideas, lack of imagination. Again, that's come through as a little bit of a theme from quite a few of you. Pupil confidence in writing, thank you. That's certainly one that's come out a few times. Dyslexic children. So again, that huge range of ability that we have now in our classrooms, and it's probably becoming an even bigger challenge than it was pre-COVID even. So yeah, thank you. Lack of experience, lack of ideas again. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing those. I always ask that question at the beginning of a session because one, I know how busy you all are. I'll explain a bit about myself in a moment. So I really want to give you that time to sort of think, really for a moment about what is it about writing? What's prompted you today to give up an hour of your very valuable time to come along and listen to me? But number two, I really just want to reassure you that the challenges that you face are very, very similar to the challenges faced by lots and lots of schools that I work with, and actually relate very nicely to my own challenges from my own particular setting. Many of the challenges shared on the screen, stamina for writing, imagination, children not having the basics, English as additional language has been a challenge, children reluctant to put pencil to paper. These were all things that I experienced when I was a primary school teacher. So for those of you that haven't met me before, and I appreciate some of you have, I was a primary school teacher and deputy head here in Harrogate, North Yorkshire, England, for 16 years, 2 different schools. The photograph on the screen is of the second school where I was deputy head teacher. I was a teaching deputy head. I had 39 year 5 children, so children sort of age 9 to 10 for those of you outside of the UK. And very much writing was a focus for that class. It was a big focus for the school as a deputy head. It was something that I had a lot of responsibility for trying to improve. And cutting a very long story short, I could never quite find the right answers. I tried lots and lots of different things, lots of things that I'll share today that did work, lots of things I tried that didn't quite work. But ultimately, I sort of realized that teaching writing was difficult. So just over 10 years ago now, I set off on a journey of Pobble. I created my own website. I created my own resources, built a little team, and now very proud 10 years later to be working with schools all across the world. As mentioned at the very beginning, traveling out, for example, to the UAE next week to work with schools out there. But what's been lovely about that journey, it's not been all the bed of roses, I have to say, is that it's given me an opportunity to, one, work with lots and lots of different schools, but number two, to really learn about the challenges that teachers face in their own setting with the teaching of writing. So what I've tried to put together in today's webinar is I will definitely mention Pobble, and I'll go into a bit more detail about Pobble towards the end of the session. But what I've tried to do is to summarize into what I've said my 7 best ideas, things that I've just seen work really, really well with a number of schools and settings that I support. It's not a scheme, it's not a program. I'm hoping that at a minimum, you'll take a few ideas away from today. It'll hopefully challenge you a little bit on things that you've maybe done in the past and haven't done for a little while. And also maybe remind you of things that you are already doing that are making a really big difference. And also for reassurance, writing is teaching. Teaching writing is super tough. So again, it's not a magic wand. Any little things that we can do to support our young writers really are going to make a difference. And it's interesting, before jumping to the next slide, we've certainly seen a trend here at Pobble of, on the back of COVID, on the back of lockdowns, which obviously were different from country to country, we've certainly seen writing dip. We've certainly seen more teachers come to us with a challenge, with a need. Perhaps it was that children were better supported in some of the other subjects at home. Perhaps it was that parents had more confidence in helping their children with some of the other subjects at home. Perhaps that it wasn't online enough with their writing. There wasn't support in that way. So things like stamina for writing, understandably, have taken a little bit of a dip. Obviously, technology has an impact on what children can now do online, what they can do on devices, and which is very different from, you know, picking up a Pobble pen or a Pobble pencil and writing in a book. So again, I'll try to address some of those concerns as we go through the session as well. Now, the live chat will remain open throughout. I'll try not to answer questions mid-session just to not ruin the flow. But if you do have a question and you're in the live session, please do post it into the chat for me, and I will pick up on some of those questions at the end as well. So, in terms of my 7 ideas, I have a sort of, I guess, a vision for what the journey of a young writer should be. And I say this as a teacher that specialised in maths. I did a maths degree and then did a PGCE. I led maths at school. I never led English. So in my world, I found writing difficult to teach. I found that children also found writing difficult to learn. So for me, I was quite a visual learner. I needed to think about, well, what is it that I need to do with my students to really get them to be the best writer they can possibly be? And I say that coming from a school that had a high proportion of children with special educational needs, a school that had over 28 different languages spoken. Therefore, I always say the best writer they could be, because not every child will be an amazing writer. We just know that that is the case. But if they can be the best writer for them, then I think as teachers, we are doing our job really, really well. So for me, I saw writing as a bit of a journey. And I'll focus a little bit on this as I go into some of my follow-up slides. But it starts with, what are we going to write about? Which seems a bit obvious. But actually, how do we best engage our pupils? Are we always using books? Are we always using the same materials? Do we repeat those year on year, even though, you know, the world is changing, curriculums are changing, children's interests are changing? So what they write about, for me, was really, really important. The other thing I always considered is, where was the writing going to go? Because again, over time, and I taught children as young as 4, all the way through to children as old as 11, what was it that really got them to produce their best? Where did that audience and purpose, where did that motivation for writing come from? And then, of course, without a magic wand, we don't get them from here to here. This is where we just put in place good teaching. What does good teaching of writing look like? What are the things that I can put in place? What are the materials I can put out to support my students? What things can I facilitate that they can help each other with, again, in order to be the best writer possible. And these are the types of things that I'll touch upon when I'm thinking about my 7 best ideas. Now, at this point, I will say that I will also share all of my slides from this evening. They are all built in Pobble. So at the end, I'll turn this into a lesson and I'll share a link to the lesson with you. I'll pop a QR code on the screen for you at the end as well. I say that because this particular graphic is one of the most requested slides that I have, because I think it's a really, whatever your curriculum, whatever scheme, however your approach to writing is in your school, I think thinking about this, how do we engage our pupils? How do we prepare them to write? How do we help them to create their best piece of work? And do we provide them with an audience and purpose? I think if we can keep with these 4 umbrella, these 4 headline messages, I know that we're going to make a big difference in the classroom. So, in terms of my 7 ideas, to begin with, I'm just going to break them down into those 7 things, and then I'm going to develop some of the ideas into a little bit more detail with some real practical examples to support. So number 1, and I won't read word for word from the screen because I know that can be quite frustrating, but for me, providing an exciting hook, as illustrated on the slide previously, is really, really important. I work with schools now that have a whole scheme that's aligned with using high quality text. Amazing. There's some brilliant schemes out there. I would argue that if they're just using high quality text all the time, and they're not then having the opportunity to look at video clips, look at images, listen to a piece of music, go on a school trip, and to build their writing around those as well, okay, then we are narrowing that hook for the child. So again, think about what it is that they're writing about. And for me, that variation makes a really big difference, okay? And again, schemes sometimes dictate you going a certain path. One of the reasons that schools choose to work with Pobble is that they already have a scheme and an approach in place, but they identify that, for example, Pobble has some really good images that might enhance some of the things that they're already doing in the classroom. So providing an exciting hook, for me, is almost the most important thing. If it's not exciting for the child, it's not engaging, then it's going to be really, really difficult to get that child to produce a great piece of work. And I say that as a teacher that's read the opening page of a book or the opening chapter of a book, and if it's not gripped my class, I've started again. You know, I very rarely planned 4 or 5 weeks worth of English. I would plan the opening 1 or 2 lessons, and I would check that they were hooked. I would check that they were engaged. And if they were, then obviously I would then build upon that over the coming week or weeks. But again, planning out something that isn't engaging for the children is really difficult. And again, I say that having read a school book with my child last night that was just not engaging at all, and we very quickly finished and moved on to a book that he could choose himself from his reading bookcase, because again, it has to be engaging. Reading is exactly the same. So number 2, building upon that a little bit more, building upon what children are really interested in might be the hook. And again, I say that in that, you know, some children, different age groups, they might have certain themes, they might have certain hobbies that they like, there might be a certain television program that they're watching, there might be a certain sporting event that's happening, but really getting to know our class. And again, the dynamics of that can change. You might have a more boy-heavy class, a more girl-heavy class. Again, those of you with, again, children coming from different regions, different countries, what is it that those children are really interested in? And if there is an opportunity, how can we link that in with our literacy? I'm a lover of sport. I know lots of children love sport. If ever there was an opportunity to write about a sporting event, we would do it. I love taking the children on school trips and building a whole week, a whole half term's worth of writing around the experience that the children had. Again, if there's a great TV program that I know the children are watching, they're coming in on a Monday morning saying, did you watch this at the weekend? And I see an opportunity to link that to my writing, then I will. Okay, so again, building upon the children's interest. Again, early years, reception, they are wonderful at doing this. You know, if you ever get the opportunity to go and just watch a brilliant EYFS practitioner, I think what they do really well is they build upon the things that children are interested in and they develop their learning from that. And I think sometimes that gets a little bit lost the further we go through school. Number 3, creating more opportunities to write. Now, again, it might seem a bit obvious, but again, with certain schemes that I've seen with certain programs, I can open up English books, writing books, halfway through a term, halfway through the year. And actually the opportunities for the children to do an extended piece of writing are very, very limited. There might be a lot of grammar work in there. There might be a lot of sentence work. There might be a lot of worksheets in there. But actually there are certain periods where perhaps the opportunities to write haven't happened. So again, how can you build that into your current plan? How can you build that into your day? How can you build that into your week? Do you offer writing opportunities at homework? If you're in younger age groups, do you have areas of the classroom where the children can go to write? If you're in a very young classroom and you have things like role play areas or model building areas or Lego, are there opportunities to write in that particular area as well? I've got a little boy at the moment who is in year 1. I think he's fairly able. He's very, very reluctant to write, which is embarrassing for me as a Pobble founder. But again, we he's building Star Wars Lego at the moment. But we're making signs, we're making instructions, we're trying to find opportunities to write. He writes a little plan for his day when he goes to bed. Again, it's trying to make it real, it's trying to get him to practice. But again, the more opportunities to do it amongst other things, the better. And again, that might be something they can do independently. That might be something that you have to support in a little way. And I've got a few more ideas on this in a follow-up slide. Number 4, and I guess it's taken that a little bit further to say, rather than just giving them more opportunities to write, can we make it a daily routine? Is there a 5-minute, 10-minute window in our day, in the same way you might read to the children, in the same way you might do phonics, in the same way you might do times tables? Is there a little window, if writing is a priority in your school, where we can build in that opportunity to write? Because in a way, that's the only way we are going to improve stamina for writing. It's the only way we are going to get the children to use their imagination more, is by giving them an opportunity to just write. It might be a free write Friday. It might be here's a sentence, can you make it better? It might be, here's a great Pobble 365 picture, can you follow on from the opening paragraph? And again, I'll share some ideas on what we do at Pobble to support that with our resource, Pobble 365. But again, it amazes me that schools approach us, writing's a priority, and I ask them, how often are they writing? Show me the writing book. And again, I see very little evidence, in some cases, not all, that the children are actually getting the opportunity to write. And sometimes that's because of marking restrictions and concerns about too much marking. And again, that opens up a whole debate around, well, does that writing always have to be marked? Or is it more important that the child gets the opportunity to do it? Because actually, a lot of children do like writing. It's sometimes the structure in which they're asked to write, which is the challenge. If they are really worried about their handwriting and we're talking to them about it all the time, actually, they are going to be reluctant to do it. So again, that daily writing routine. Number 5, I'm a big believer that for children to become good writers, they actually have to be really good at talking as well. And it might sound, again, a little bit obvious, but I have some schools that have, they focus particularly on children talking about their writing. This image here is from a school that I've worked with that has, they call it a conversation station. The children go to the table, they talk about a Pobble 365 image, they generate vocabulary, and then they go back to their table and they write. I've got 2 children. My little boy, as mentioned, who's year 1. My little girl's in year 4, but she has Down syndrome. Which is amazing. She's amazing. She's incredible. But for obvious reasons, she also finds writing really, really tough. One thing we do an awful lot in our family is we just talk. We have conversations around the dinner table. We talk about the weather. We talk about the day. We talk about what happened yesterday. We're trying to get Eva, my little girl, to talk as often as possible. And from that, we then see when it comes to things like writing or just talking, just a general vocabulary and my little boy's vocabulary, because of this opportunity we give them to just have a conversation, to just talk to us. Again, it has a huge impact. And I always say to people, if my little girl can become a writer, if she can read, which she does, then I think most of the children have a good chance. She's got a very obvious need. And actually, every child is capable of making some type of progress. So I think some of the things I share on here also come from my role as a daddy as well as a teacher as well. So that ability to just allow children to rehearse a sentence, tell the person next to you what you're going to write. How are you going to start your story? Tell me what you're going to write. Talk about the picture first. What's your first 3 lines going to be? Again, if they can't say it, they are really, really going to struggle to write that down. And again, it's a very obvious step. But again, because of the speed of which we have to do things sometimes in schools and the pressures that we're under, we don't always give children that opportunity to talk. So again, if one of your takeaways from today is, okay, yeah, time to talk, right? How am I going to facilitate just a little bit more time for the children to chat about what they're going to write first? A conversation station is a lovely way of introducing that, particularly in the younger age groups in school. Now, alongside that ability to probably talk more, and you may be saying, well, Simon, they talk too much. So obviously that talk needs to be structured in a little bit of a way, is I'm also a great believer in developing a love of words. Again, going back to our conversations in our house, we're forever coming up with alternative words to things. So, you know, it's always raining here in the north of England, as those of you on the call today will know. So again, whenever it's raining, we might have a conversation around, well, what else could we say? You know, is it just raining? Is it raining heavily? What else could we call it? You know, it's pouring down. I'm getting so my little boy says, I'm getting soaked, Daddy. We're talking yesterday about being tired. They say they're tired all the time. So again, they started coming up with alternatives to being tired. My little boy's favorite phrase at the moment is "I'm booshed," which I'm not even sure is a word, but again, the concept is the more words we introduce, the better. If you've ever listened to the amazing Ros Wilson, she talks a lot about children developing their vocabulary. But again, we have to facilitate that. Now, when that comes to writing, that can become quite a challenge because children will quite often go with safe word choices. You know, they'll write the word in their book that they think they know how to spell or they think they know is right. So a little strategy I used to have is that, you know, I try to get the children to be brave with their word choices. So if they wanted to try a new word or a word they thought was correct, but they weren't sure, they would just underline that word. They would write it down, they would underline it. That meant when I was looking at their writing or they were sharing it with a partner, that was really highlighting to us, this is a new word for me. This is a word I wanted to try and use, but I wasn't quite sure it was either A, the correct word, or B, whether I've spelt it correctly. And then they might get out a dictionary and check, or they might check it with me. But that developing a love of words is really, really important. And again, the more opportunities, in my own classroom, we used to do a game every week, sometimes twice a week. I put a word on the board and say, come up with 3 alternatives. We do little games where they play against each other. One person would say a word, the next person would say a different word, the next. And again, the person that said the last word, they would be the winner. So again, it would be like vocabulary tennis, as we would call it. But again, it was just about generating new vocabulary. And again, for those of you working with children with English as an additional language, English as a second language, they have a very limited vocabulary, as we know, to begin with. So anything we could do in our classroom to introduce them to new words, to new vocabulary, the better. If you've not seen it before, I'd highly encourage you to have a look at the books you choose. They take you, they're designed for younger children, but they're amazing storybooks where the children are taken on a journey. Every page has a choice. There are unlimited vocabulary options in there, different worlds, different planets, different costumes, different characters, different friends, different hobbies. But the goal is it's a book that gets the children to talk, and it's a book that gets them to think about vocabulary as well. If you've not seen it before, definitely have a check. So it's called You Choose, and there's variations of that book out there around space and fantasy, etc. And then the final one, before I sort of develop some of these into a few further ideas, is going right to the end of my journey, celebrating success. I'm a big believer that unless the writing is going to go somewhere, children will be not as motivated as you want them to be. And I say that lots of you in the chat mentioned children being reluctant to write, not motivated, not seeing it as that important. Actually, if you really think about it, if that writing is going into a book that only you will look at and probably mark and give them feedback, that's the only person that sees it. why would they want it to be amazing? Yes, of course, we hope that they want to impress you as the classroom teacher. But ultimately, most of us crave a bigger audience than just one person. So in the context of children, I would always think about, well, how do I facilitate the chance for them to read it to somebody else? How do I ensure that we make sure if they write something good that it's recognized? How do we build into our school that opportunity to celebrate children that are doing amazing writing? You know, the picture in the top right hand corner is a school that celebrates their writers of the week because they know that writing is an issue and they wanted to raise the profile of it. In the same way we celebrate attendance and readers and times table rock stars, how do we do that for writing? So knowing that the writing is going to go somewhere, it could be a display, it could be a class book, it could be publishing it on an ed tech tool, however you deem, but really thinking about where does that end piece of work go? What does it look like? Is there a real motivation for this child for it to be their best? And I think if there isn't, we will always have that battle around children being reluctant to write it into their book. So again, audience, purpose, celebrating successes, all really, really important. So I'm going to take just a few of those ideas and develop them into, I guess, a few more practical suggestions. So in terms of the hook, lots of you will have signed up today because you already know about Pobble. You're perhaps already subscribing to Pobble. You're perhaps a free user of Pobble. You perhaps follow us on one of our many social media channels. One of the reasons that people work with us is, of course, our wonderful Pobble 365 images. Every single day on our platform, we put a great image, and alongside that image, we always have a set of ready-made activities. And as we get towards the end of our session today, I'm going to delve into those activities in a little bit more detail, just to show you how they really fit with those 7 great ideas that I talked about a moment ago. But what people also don't realize is that those images can be used for other things to support the teaching of writing in your classroom as well. So as an example, we share in Pobble 365 some vocabulary, we share questions, we share prompts. But actually, if I was using Pobble 365 in my own setting, one of the ways I was using the images is to get the children to generate their own words. And this is where I see it used really well, younger, lower down the school. A teacher shares a Pobble 365 image and they simply ask the children, can you come up with 10 words, 10 adjectives to describe the picture? 5, 3, depending upon the age of the student. So generating vocabulary just based on really powerful images that you have access to in the Pobble 365 tool. In terms of talk, again, if we want to generate good vocabulary, I mentioned that importance of children talking to each other. So again, a really nice way to use a Pobble 365 picture might be to say, talk to your partner for 10 seconds about this image. Actually try that one tomorrow. You'll be amazed how difficult even your most chatty child will find talking for 10 seconds. They might go, oh, I can see lots of houses, it's under the water, and then they'll start to stumble and then they'll start to look a bit more closely. So actually really rehearsing, what can I see? How can I turn that into a sentence? How ultimately in 10 seconds can I turn that into some type of paragraph? So talking about the image might be another way that you can use them. Another way, again, I'm just throwing a few examples in there, senses. So again, some of our weaker writers often use the I can see, this happens, I see this, I see that. Actually, our better writers start to use their senses to describe the setting. I could hear, I could smell, I could feel, I could touch, I could taste. So again, using an image to say, if I was here, what might I see? What might I smell? What might I hear? What might I taste? So I'm building in those building blocks, generating that vocabulary so that if I suddenly say, write me a setting description, actually remember when you write your setting description, think about your senses. Don't just write down what you see. Also try to use 1 or 2 of your other senses as well. So all the time I'm using those powerful images to develop something that many of you identified in the chat vocabulary was a real focus in your school. Another strategy for developing children's language, again, those children that are always writing, I was sad, I was scared, I was happy, I was sad. Again, how do we develop that vocabulary a little bit more? So again, many of you will have heard of similar techniques to things like show me, don't tell me. Don't tell me that you felt scared. Tell me what scared looks like. But again, I would always do that by sharing an image. I would share a scary image, perhaps, like the one on the right. Imagine, children, that tomorrow you were in the wood and you met this beast. How would you feel? And inevitably they would say, scared, frightened, terrified, nervous. I would then say, right, tell me about a time that you last felt scared. How did you know you were scared? What did that do to your body? Okay, and some of the children would start to say things like, my heart pounded, I sweated, I got goosebumps, I started to shake, I froze. They'll know the answers. They'll be able to tell you. We're bringing it to life. Right, children, how do we use some of that vocabulary to turn it into a sentence? Right, her heart pounded inside her chest as the terrifying giant chased after her. Instead of saying, I saw a giant and I was scared. So we're drip feeding in just great writing techniques. But again, we're using the power of a great image to do that. And that's where Pobble 365 really comes into its own. Another little idea. Again, I've got a brilliant Pobble 365 image. This time I'm just getting the children to write what they see. What do they think? What do they wonder? Again, if you've not heard of this before, it's a great activity from Pi Corbett. And again, the idea is that we're just getting the children to think a little bit outside the box. Most children would be able to write, I see 3 mice in a boat. Actually, the children that get to the very bottom and say, I wonder where the boat is heading. I wonder if, because the boat's made of paper, whether it will sink. I wonder who's in charge of the boat. I wonder who's steam. Again, all these questions. Okay, it's a bit like inference when they're reading, but how do we develop that into their writing as well? So again, an I see, I think, I wonder activity alongside, again, a brilliant Pobble 365 image can really work for you as well. So that was a few ideas around the hook. Using an image, but using it in a different way to support some of those sort of 7 ideas that I shared earlier. Now, another thing that I mentioned was that ability to just have a really good conversation, to talk. And actually to have a really good conversation often requires children to just ask really good questions. And again, when I was at my second school, we did a huge assessment for learning project. I'm very passionate about assessment for learning. I think for all the things that come and go in schools and all the schemes and all the initiatives, actually having good assessment for learning principles really does make a difference. And for me, I was really passionate about the questions that we asked as teachers, but also building on from that, the questions that children asked each other. Again, the better questions that they asked, the better the answers, the better the vocabulary, the better the talk, ultimately the better the writing that the children produce. So again, anything we can do to encourage the children to ask better questions, to ask better questions to us, for us to ask better questions to them, ultimately lead, I believe, to better writing in the classroom. And the way that I sort of brought that to life for the children is I introduced what was called a questioning grid. So again, this is one of my own. You're happy to take a copy of it from the slides. But again, the idea was when I, for example, if I was doing a hot seating activity, and for those of you that don't know, hot seating, it's drama, it's role play. We choose a child in the class, we pop them on a seat, and we get them to be in the role of a character, perhaps from a film or a book or a picture. And we ask that child questions. So again, in that scenario, I would be getting the children to come up with questions, but instead of just saying why, or what, or when, I would be getting them to use the questioning grid, ideally a variation of the blue words, but even better, a combination of a blue word with a red word. What is, when did, who can, why would. So again, the more questions that they're asking in a different style, again, the bigger variations of the answers that the students came up with, which led to better conversations, led to better talk, led to better writing, which again, ultimately is the end goal. So again, thinking about your own classroom, your own setting, what do you do at the moment to ensure if the children are asked to speak to a talk partner, asked to have a discussion, asked to generate a question, how do you know that the questions that they're asking are really good and that they are going to lead again to that better talk and better vocabulary? Another way that we can support the children, I mentioned in my sort of graphic about the writing journey, what can we do to help the children along the way? Again, I'm a big believer in word banks and vocabulary. What I don't like are those generic ones that you can just print off websites, 50 alternatives to said, 30 feelings words, 17 different openers. Actually, I'm a big believer in this is okay as a word bank, but you'll see in Pobble 365, I'd far rather the word bank be really linked to the image that's there. And that word bank changed with tomorrow's image. So again, the vocabulary we were introducing them to, it's far better that it's 9 words that really matter than 50 words that we might use occasionally. So again, using word banks, big believer in how we present those to the children, where we get them from. Actually, a good old flip chart and writing that vocabulary with the children, that might be good enough. Okay, so again, what can we do to help? And then finally, I mentioned celebration. Again, I've got 3 ways that I really think that you could celebrate writing in your school. For me, celebrating Writers of the Week is so easy to implement. If at the moment you have an awards ceremony, you have awards assembly, you have a certificate Friday or Thursday, depending upon where in the world that you are, at the moment, does it recognise writing? And if writing is a focus in your school, then I believe that it should. We've got a great, and I'll point you towards it on our website in a moment, we've got a great celebration pack. You know, introduce a Writer of the Week pencil certificate. Ask each teacher each week to select 2 or 3 children that have tried really hard with their writing and start to recognise them in your school. The more children you recognise, the more children that will want to be a star writer. So that's one way, some type of simple recognition in the school that writing is really, really important. Number 2, at a classroom level, we obviously can't give certificates to every child every week. So again, what can we do in our own classroom to start to recognise great writing? Something I introduced was a super sentence board. So if I saw a child coming up with a brilliant sentence, I would say, amazing. What a super sentence. Can you take a moment before you go out to break, before you go for your lunch, just to copy that sentence down onto a Post-it note for me? I'm going to pop it onto my super sentence board. Now, there were 3 real goals of that. One, I'm a big believer, and I do it with my own children a lot, positive reinforcement. You know, despite sometimes them not always behaving, we actually know that as teachers, positive generally works better than negative. So again, the more children in my class that I could say, brilliant, brilliant, love it, great sentence, super sentence, amazing, love it, can you copy it down for me? Actually, the more children would want to make their writing even better. So that's number 1, recognition. Number 2, by bringing together all these sentences as a teacher, I got this amazing resource that I could use to help me with my model writing, my shared writing. I could be sharing magpieing ideas with the children all of the time. And then number 3, lots of you mentioned children are writing at different levels. You know, you have that child that doesn't have a one-to-one, doesn't have a support, but you know they find writing difficult, they find starting difficult, they're constantly coming to you for new ideas. They can go and use your super sentence bot. Go and magpie, go and borrow one of the sentences from the super sentence bot. See if there's some ideas on there that can help you. So it almost becomes an extension of you in terms of somewhere that some of those weaker writers can go to for a little bit of help if needed. Again, it's the easiest display to implement. I've even made a heading for you, which I'll share in a moment. But again, if you are thinking about how do I just improve writing in my own classroom, just try it for a week. A1 piece of paper, super sentence board, ask the children every time you see them write a great sentence, pop it on a Post-it note, and just see, does it have an impact? Are the children excited by it? And you really will be amazed. And then the third one is probably the more difficult to implement. But again, can you publish their work in some? Can you turn it into a book? Can you turn it? This is a school in Dubai that I worked with a few years ago. They have a writing hall of fame. They have amazing writing in there that's produced throughout the year. And the children's goal is to get into that space. They want their work on that display in that corridor for the whole school to see. We publish work onto our Pobble platform. Some schools publish it onto their school website or their blog. Some pupils publish it onto tools like Seesaw and Google Class. Again, wherever that end point is there an opportunity for it to go from their book to somewhere else? We've mentioned reading it out. We've mentioned celebrating it in assembly. Could it be turned into something? And again, I really get you to think about that in terms of your own classroom. What can you do? Look at your displays tomorrow. Are they full of children's work? Are they full of generic displays? Is there a place where you could create a Writers Hall of Fame where you start to just celebrate some of the great writing that goes on? Or is there a place in your school? Or is there a website or a tool that you could use to do that? So that concludes my 7 ideas. Now, before I come back to the classroom pack, I'm going to leap into the actual website just for 5 minutes, because what I want to really show you is lots of you know of Pobble, but probably haven't until today maybe realized why Pobble 365 has been built in the way that it has. It was definitely built with the busy classroom teacher in mind, but probably more importantly, it was built based upon my mission of just wanting to inspire more children to write. So, as many of you will know, every day we have a Pobble 365 image, and underneath the image, there is already a set of ready-made writing activities. If I go on tomorrow, that image will be different. And of course, the activities that fall underneath that image will be different as well. Now, in terms of the images and the activities themselves, again, the way that we've designed the activities is to try to support some of the initiatives I mentioned in my 7 ideas. We know that some children find writing difficult. That's why we provide the story starter. That's why we provide sentence starters. We know that vocabulary is a challenge. Therefore, we've provided a word bank to help. We know, as mentioned a number of times, discussion, conversation, coming up with good questions is super important. Again, that's why we've come up with those questions to help you and to help the students. Many of you mentioned grammar. Grammar's a real challenge. How do we get children to edit, improve, up-level their work? Again, that's why we put in things like try and make these sentences in better, try and add the punctuation that matters. And again, we know that some children just need an example, which is why that sample text is in place as well. So many of you will know those activities already exist. Possibly now know a little bit more about why. What perhaps you don't know is that the big benefit of being a Pobble subscriber or a Pobble school is that over the last 12 months, we've been trying to make these lessons even better. Now, one of the big changes is you can now make all of those activities easier or more difficult with the click of a button, using some AI behind the scenes. And again, we try to put ourselves between the AI and you so that you don't worry about what the AI gurges out. We've tried to make those activities more difficult and more easy, depending upon the age of the children or ability of the children that you are working with. So that's a real huge improvement. And again, if you've not had a chance to try that out, I really would encourage you to sign up to a free trial or to reach out to me to have a little go at using that element. The other thing that we've been working a lot on, and again, that people probably haven't realized, is that all of the images, certainly from February the 23rd onwards, have all been updated. We've been talking to children, we've been talking to teachers, we've been looking at the most popular, and we've really listened as to what images help you to get the best writing possible. And it's interesting, there's a few actually, children love writing about animals. I'm not a big animal fan at all, but probably 1 in every 3 or 4 of our images are animals because the children love them. The colors really, really mattered. Actually, the color of the image made a big difference to the engagement level of the student. Having too many characters in a story or in a picture, again, was quite confusing for lots of the children. So again, you'll notice that on most of our images now, there's never more than probably 2 or 3 at a maximum of main characters. That's because things like dialogue and how do we introduce that, conversation, description, again, putting too many things in front of the children, again, that made writing really, really tricky as well. So that's one big change. And again, with a premium subscription, you can go in and you can choose any image at any time. You are not just restricted to today's. Okay, so again, if you've not been and had a little bit of an explore of that part, then do let me know. The third element that we've done, and again, this is based upon feedback from you and also the way that we've seen the platform used, is if you see a lesson that you really like, you now have the ability to add it to your lessons. And then if I click into my lessons, the big improvement here is that if I now open that lesson, I now also have the ability to tweak and change. So if I want to add my own vocabulary activity, my own activity around editing, I want to get the children to talk a bit more about the picture. I have the ability, either one, to edit a slide, or two, to duplicate, to copy, or to add an additional slide as well. And again, a lot of people don't realize that that functionality is there. But again, we're teachers. We think we built something really good, but you know your students. So we know that you sometimes do need to tweak and change. Another example of that might be, if I ever go and teach this lesson with a group of children, which I do quite often, I always change the order. I actually always start with the questions. Then I move on, go into my sort of 5 to 10 minutes each day. I then would probably introduce some type of punctuation or sentence challenge. Maybe I might start the week with the questions. I might then move on to a smaller challenge on a Tuesday. I then might introduce some vocabulary to the children. I might then get them to continue with the sentence starters. And then I might do a free write Friday where I get them to go ahead and write their own story. So for me, I would definitely be using that ability to change the order of the slides if I had that premium option. And then the fourth thing that, again, before I sort of go back into my slides and start to bring the session to a bit of conclusion, is we've also thought really carefully about, well, if we really want to inspire children to write, if we want to really improve writing in our school for all of our learners, how do we make these resources as accessible as possible? So again, you may in the past have always put Pobble on a screen. Again, if you go into our share options, you'll see that you can now copy a link into tools like Seesaw. You can send it directly to Google Classroom. You can print out the content. You can even generate a QR code so that the child can have a copy of the lesson on their own device. And you can even now share the content with your colleagues via email as well, if you're part of a larger school or team. So again, it's a very quick demo. But again, what I want to really emphasize is, one, the whole concept of Pobble 365 is built on my 7 ideas and what I believe makes a good writer, particularly around using an alternative hook to, for example, a book or to a film. But also the structure of those activities supports things like daily writing routine, more talk, more conversation, developing a love of words, generating new vocabulary. They're all of the things that we really promote within that Pobble platform as well. Now, there are, of course, multiple other things that you can do, which I won't go into today. We've got lots of topic lessons. We've got lots of quick writes, which are non-fiction versions of Pobble 365. We've got the biggest bank of children's writing in the world in our writing bank. But again, a really good starting point if you are thinking about using Pobble a little bit further on the back of today is to think about how could you maybe make a little bit more of the Pobble 365 element that is there already. So I'm going to leap back into my presentation and start to bring my session to a bit of a close and answer some questions that you might have. So I'll just pop into my share and I'm going to go into my full screen mode and I'm going to quickly flick through to my slides. Okay, so there are a couple of resources that I'm going to share with you on the back of today. First resource, just as a thank you really for coming along and giving up an hour of your time. I mentioned Pobble certificates, I mentioned questioning grids. There's a beautiful writing pack. It's full of wonderful resources that you could take away and use tomorrow. It's a freebie from me. Some of the resources I've mentioned today, some of them I mentioned in CPD sessions that I run in school. But again, hopefully some really nice, easy win. Super sentence header, for example, is in there. The conversation header is in there. Special Pobble writing paper, feedback, questioning grids. So again, I'll share that link in the chat, but it also is accessible from the presentation slide as well. Okay, so again, if you do want to take and use any of those ideas, then do. Those of you that are interested in exploring Pobble a little bit further, I'll pop back to the questions in a moment. There are a couple of different options in terms of Pobble. We have a 7-day free trial. That's really, really important. And then we also offer an individual and a school option. And again, if you're looking for what's the difference, Simon, I'm a free user already. On our pricing page, you will see we very clearly map out what does Pobble free look like, which lots of you are already. What is the advantage of being a school or an individual? And I hope on the back of today that I've convinced a few of you to at least go and explore that side of Pobble a little bit further as well. In terms of the classroom resource, if it comes up with a 404 link, I'll share it again in a moment for you. Just bear with me a second and I'll share that at the end. It's also accessible from the slideshow. So when you're in the slideshow, if you click on view website, it definitely will take you to that link, but I will share it again in a moment for you as well. So again, if you are interested in the subscription side of Pobble pricing, and again, there is a subscription slide within the presentation for you as well. On the back of today, hopefully you will want to stay in touch with us. Lots of you are part of our mailing list already, but there are a number of different ways that you can also learn about what we do at Pobble. We're very active on social media. I'm doing a lot on LinkedIn now, with Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook groups. So again, within those groups, we're not salesy. We are very much about inspiration, writing inspiration, sharing good ideas, sharing good practice in the way that I hope I've done in tonight's session with you as well. So if you are part of any of those communities, do give us a follow. If you've enjoyed tonight, definitely give it a shout out. And obviously do connect with us and ask any questions that you might have as well.